So, first things first. I have both government mode and contractor mode up. So we're going to go over getting a schedule into contractor mode, how that looks getting into contractor mode, the approval process of getting it over to the government side, what the government side sees when they approve it, and then once it's approved, we can look at the contractor side to see how it imports into the program. So right here, I have the SDEF file. So SDEF files usually come from Primavera. They're basically a standard data exchange format. That's what SDEF stands for. And on WebEx last time. Anyway, so talking about the SDEF file. The SDEF file comes from Primavera. Primavera has had quite a few versions over the last many years, from version 3 all the way to, nowadays it's owned by, I believe, Oracle. That sdef.txt file gets popped out onto your computer. A contractor can have a scheduler that they pay to connect and to do the schedule. Give me a second here. Yes. Well, we have several SDEF files. This is just an initial, but so you can pay a scheduler to do this, or they can do this themselves with Primavera. Also, if the contractor does not have Primavera, say it's a smaller contract, the government can go in and set the contract to manually enter start and finish dates. Let's see here. Looks like we're still having a few people having connection problems. I don't know if we want to try to help that or continue on. Dallas, let me know what you prefer.
You can go ahead and chat with them on the chat. I'll give a little background on some of the what the purpose of this SDEF file and scheduling and stuff like that.
Perfect.
All right, so basically the SDEF file that we're talking about is just, I know it's probably foreign, but it's really a contractor way of creating a schedule in a software called P6. And that software creates this file. And this file is basically the contract schedule, which is required by contract. And we can hold the contractor a lot easier to a SDEF file than, say, a PDF version of a schedule, because we can see the logic between all the different activities and understand in more detail than we could in a normal PDF. So most contracts require the contractor submit a schedule, and the SDEF file and from P6 is usually the preferred method, because we can import it into RMS. We could see all the details. It actually makes it a lot easier on the contractor as well for tracking their activities and various things like that. So I highly recommend having the contractor, when they do give a schedule to you guys, to get that in a P6 file. If put it into your contract if you can, and or request it from them. But
please enter a contract ID followed by pound.
Okay, that was talking there for a while.
Only a few seconds, so you're good.
Okay. All right, so go ahead and switch over to the contractor mode. I kind of get a brief description of what this SDEF file, why we want it, and what it is, and then now take it. So say the contractor already created this SDEF file. What does the contractor do with it in RMS, and how does it integrate into RMS? And then after that, go into the activities, etc.
Perfect. Can help out with the questions that we have. All right. So Dallas, he introduced us to the SDEF file, how the contractor gets the SDEF file, what the government is expecting. So we're going to go through that whole process right now. Again, I have the government side up on the left-hand side. We know it's government because it's blue up in the top right-hand corner. When I switch over to the contractor's side, I have a gold or yellow tile option on the top right-hand corner, Contractor Mode Home. So we're inside of the same contract on both RMS copies. I'm running both at the same time, just so you know you can run many copies of RMS at the same time. So we're inside of this contract, E12564. And to import an SDEF file, again, we talked about how this SDEF file comes from Primavera. It pops out standard data exchange format, and it pops out onto your computer. So you need to save it to your computer. Either the contractor will have a scheduler that makes this, because Primavera is very expensive, right? So the contractor may pay a scheduler to do their schedule, or they may have a copy of Primavera on their computer, someone that's specifically designed to do that for multiple contracts. So one thing that we noticed when emailing this text file, a lot of email applications, including Google, will go through that text file and scan it for viruses. And what they'll do is they'll put a whole bunch of blank spaces at the end of the text file. So when the recipient downloads the SDEF file and tries to import it into RMS, there's problems because of the extra spaces, new lines, et cetera, et cetera. So it's highly recommended to zip up the SDEF file and pop that into your email as an attachment if you're sending the SDEF file over email. That includes if the government wants to get it from the contractor. Don't just send the text file by itself. It's a lot better today than it was back in the past, but there's still incidences where the SDEF file gets modified, changed, the structure gets changed, because every new line, every space is counted. All right, so inside of my CTemp folder, I have my SDEF file. As the contractor, I'm going to go in and just so you guys know, I open up the contract. When I open up the contract, I'm going to go to Import Export. Inside of Import Export is an NAS SDEF file. Once we go there, I have a screen that allows me to import the SDEF files. So I'm going to hit the Add button. When I hit the Add button, I select the file on my computer. So I can go to my CTemp folder. Once I hit that, I select the SDEF file that I want to import. I'm going to hit Open. And when I hit Next, it's going to go through and ask me what is the file that I'm importing. Is it a preliminary schedule, an initial? Is it going to impact the schedule? Is it a monthly update? From what I've seen, usually you have the initial for the start or preliminary. And then from that point on, it's a monthly update. You can put anything you want in for the project ID. I'm going to leave that blank for now. But an important thing to note, this date comes from the file. It does not come from when I imported the SDEF file. So the data date, that's the date of the data. So when I go to Windows Explorer, I look on this file right here, and I go to Properties. The date created was September 4th. My bad. The date created comes from inside of the SDEF file. My bad. Completely scratched that. It does not come from the date of the creation of the file. So whenever the SDEF file was created inside of Primavera, that's what date it will pull from the data date. That gets a little confusing, as you saw. All right, so we'll hit Finish here. And what that's going to do is that's going to go through and import the SDEF file into RMS. This is the screen that the contractor sees after they import into RMS. Now, importing it into RMS does not mean that any data in the SDEF file has actually gotten into the contract yet. That comes later. Right now, we have to request acceptance to import this SDEF file from the government side. Let's hop over to the government side. When I go to Import Export on the government side, and I open up the SDEF file, or the SDEF module, note, it's got an entry here. So it shows that the contractor...
Can you go over the
This meeting is being recorded and or transcribed.
Can you go over the
Wow, that was scary. I wonder why it's doing that. All right, do you want to type that out, Dallas? I heard, can you go over? And then that was the last I heard. Yes, exactly. Go over the other items on the contractor side and show what the columns are showing. Yes, exactly. Yep, we'll do that definitely. All right, so we're gonna show that what Dallas and John Stevens are talking about. They're talking about the fact that we can actually preview the data that goes into the contract before we import it into the contract. This is on the contractor side. Okay, so on the government side, we see that they have gone in and they've uploaded their first SDEF file. It has not been imported. It has not been approved. Back to the contractor's side, we have the initial schedule with the date, with the activity count. These are the number of activities that have gone, that are going to go inside of RMS but have not yet. And we have the cost to date. So there's a payment in here as well. Now note, approval status, not requested. We have not asked the government to import this yet. So what we're going to do is there's two imports on an SDEF file. You have included in the SDEF file, you've got contract data and you've got payment data. Contract data involves features of work, the pay activities. It involves contract data with dates. So you can actually put in dates inside of your activities and import those into RMS. And the SDEF file also allows you to import a payment. So there's two types of data sets that you can import into the contract. Import data and import payment information. So the first time I go and import an SDEF file, I'm going to import the data into the contract, right? It's going to include my schedule. It's going to include activities. It's going to include features of work. Now, this one does not include features of work, like John Stevens noted. This one also, so right here, when I click on these, this is a preview of what it will look like when I import the data into RMS. So the contractor has the ability to say, without having to get the government involved, what will it look like when I import data into RMS? Also, so 2.3, when you imported an SDEF file, you never were able to see what exactly was imported into the contract. And that resulted in, some problems, especially if you accidentally import the wrong SDEF file. So here, on the contractor's side, I can see what's going to happen if they're, to note, when you have an SDEF import into RMS, anything in RMS that's not in the SDEF file will be deleted, because we're assuming Primavera is the source, right, of all the data. So if I have an activity in RMS that I created and I go and do an SDEF import and that activity is not inside of the SDEF file, it will default to being deleted inside of RMS when I do the import. So right here, as the contractor, if I go in and I hit, all right, I'm going to import this data in, we note that the SDEF file has not been approved for import. So they cannot go and import this into the contract. Now, before we go and ask the government, hey, can I import this into the contract? We're going to go and look at the financial data, the payment. So again, we talked about how you have data imported into the contract. We're talking features of work, we're talking activities with schedule dates. We're going to go and look at the payment itself. So here, one thing to note, the only way that you can import earnings into RMS as the contractor is if you have the ability to create an invoice. So if the contractor is waiting to get an invoice back from the government, it will not allow them to do that. All right, ignore the developer message. So right now it's going to pretend that we're going to import a payment inside of RMS. All right, so here is what a payment import looks like. Right here, we have a list of all the activities with the activity amount. We also have the earnings to date and any comment status on the right-hand side, whether or not it was found in the contract, whether or not it was found in the SDEF file. We also have earnings this period. On the bottom right-hand corner, if I click on import into invoice number 1, note, this SDEF file has not been approved for import, so therefore the contractor cannot import it in. So these are the two very important previews that the contractor needs to do on an SDEF file before they request to import inside of the contract. If they have not done those two previews, then we can't be guaranteed that the SDEF file that they're importing is correct. So after they've checked these two, what we're going to do is we're going to request acceptance to import into the contract. So over here on the government side, I've switched over to the government side. I've requested acceptance to import this SDEF file. On the government side, we have an SDEF file awaiting to be approved. So I'm going to open up on the government side here, double click this, and very similar to the contractor side, FYI, on the government side, you can also preview data imported into the contract. So if you're not sure that your contractor has gone in and made sure that this SDEF file is the file that should be imported or not, you yourself, as the government, can open up this screen right here and preview the data imported into contract and also preview earnings before you go and approve the request to import this SDEF file. So on the government side, I can click this right here, ignore the developer message. On the government side, if they do not have an invoice available, we won't be able to do that. So here we're going to preview the data import. So on this side, the activities that the contractor is suggesting that we import will appear here. If you click on these, the data on the fields on below here will change. So on this activity, they have this date, the start date, If there's any activity that exists inside of the contract already, it'll tell you what's going to happen. So it says, all right, this activity is not found in the SDEF file. That means this one right here is gone. It's going to get wiped out when this import happens. On this activity right here, we have it already exists in the contract, but there's changes to the dates, the schedule. So before there were no dates on this one. Now there's going to be dates on this one. So we're going to hit back. So the government can reject, right? So say, all right, this does not look anything like what I talked with the contractor. I don't want this to happen. I can click reject request. When I hit reject, the contractor will show on their side it was rejected. And that's it on the contractor side. They're going to have to import another SDEF file, or say as the government, you meant to click, no, I meant to accept this. I did not mean to click that button down there that said reject. I can go here and rescind my rejection and actually approve the SDEF file. So you have options. You can reject, you can also approve, but even if you've rejected, you can go back in and approve it. So on the contractor side right now, what they would have to do if it was rejected, contractor would have to go back out and add another SDEF file. Note, they can add as many SDEF files here as they want. So I'm going to rescind the rejection and approve. Come over here to the contractor side. Note, I'm hitting the refresh button. When I have two copies of RMS up and I'm working in the same contract, the way to get the data from one over to the other is to hit the refresh button. So if the refresh button is spinning on the top right-hand corner, that usually means there's new data on the screen that I need, and you can hit the refresh button. It will usually start spinning anyway because it gets new data, new timestamps from the server side. Okay, now we're back on the contractor side. We just approved the schedule to be imported. So now the contractor can go in and import data into the contract data, or it can go in and import the payment. So we're going to do both of these. So right now, but before I do that, here, just to note, there are three tabs in the center here. We have the calendars, we got the activities, and we have the actual SDEF file itself. So, some people like to go in here and look at the SDEF file. Some people have the ability to look at this thing and see exactly what's going to happen. People like John Stevens, they can look at this file and say, they can tell you exactly what's going to happen from start to finish when RMS opens up this file and imports it. So they can just look at this file and say, nope, not good enough. Nope, this isn't what we agreed to, or looking good, should work fine. Also, you can go in here and do a Control-A and copy that into a notepad file. So that's another feature that you have right there as well. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to import data into the contract. Right here gives you a little idea of what's going to happen. There's changes to the schedule. I'm going to import this data into the contract. RMS gives me a warning saying, hey, you import this SDEF file into the contract, there may be overwrite of existing data. The reason of that being is because we have Primavera as the system of record. If anything is inside of RMS that's not in Primavera in relation to this SDEF file, it's going to get wiped out. So, and they can see that on this preview import. So there were some activities that did not exist in the SDEF file. They're going to be wiped out when we do this import. So we're going to hit yes, we're sure, and it's going to go through and import the SDEF file. Now, depending on the size of the SDEF file, it can take some time. This one is relatively small, so it didn't take that long. But I've had some SDEF files that are, in the megabytes, and they can take a while because the contract has tens of thousands of activities. Hit OK. Now that data has been imported into the contract. What we can also do is we can import the earnings into our payment as well and create invoice number 1. So here we go. We're going to go and import into invoice number 1. Now the contractor, if it does not allow them to create invoice number 1, usually that indicates that they have a payment waiting to be approved by the government, or they haven't completed the one that was there already. So whenever they do an SDEF import, if it has a payment, there needs to be the ability to create a payment. And RMS will let them know when they do that as well. So we're going to import into the invoice number 1. Note, again, anything that you do with the SDEF file, anything that's there inside of RMS will get overwritten by the SDEF file. So here we go. We're going to go do the import into the contractor side. Didn't take very long. Now what we can do is we can go over to the payment and see what's going on. This button right here, compared to live data, that's a button that we're working on that's coming soon. That button doesn't do anything right now, but it will. It kind of does a more overview of these two buttons right here, where we preview the contract data and we preview the earnings data, but that's coming in the future. So I'm on the contractor side. I hit back. On the government side, we note that the date the invoice was imported and the date the contract data was imported. So these two dates changed on the government side. We know that they went in and updated. They actually imported the SDEF files. So here I hit back on the contractor side. I'm going to go to the finances, and I'm going to go to the progress payment. So progress payment number 1, not completed by the contractor. It has been imported in with the SDEF file. So we're going to hit the prepare pay request number 1. And here we go. Here's all the data that came over from the SDEF file. We have 53 activities, 7 are not fully paid, and 2 activities with earning amounts on this pay period. So the contractor is going to be asking for $105,000 on this pay period. Of course, the dates have to be put in, requested earnings need to be completed. Again, back here on the SDEF screen, I go back to the import-export SDEF. I can go in and I can add an additional SDEF file while I'm doing all this. So say the payment hasn't been completed yet. We're still working some things out. The contractor can still go in and add as many items here as they want for the SDEF file, and it's going to maintain a history of those SDEF files. The schedule type is important to set because that way we know what the SDEF file is referring to. So here I can go in and add a new file. And I can choose the second SDEF file, which is this one right here. I'm not going to do anything with it because somebody else is going to take over here shortly, but I'm going to import this in, and I'm going to leave this blank for now, and it may be deleted. Nope, file type needs to be set. We're going to do an impact, finish, just to show you what it looks like when there's 2 in here. So again, there's data here. How do we know what's changed? We're going to go to the preview import earnings into contract. We're going to go also preview contract data if there's any changes to the schedule. Note that the dollar amounts are very different on this one, but right now I'm going to back off of this and show the outside. So right here, we have the 2 schedules. If the contractor tries to go in and delete, only the government users for now have the ability to delete the SDEF file. A new feature coming in a future version of RMS that we're working on right now, as long as the SDEF file has not been disapproved or approved for import, the contractor will be able to delete it. So that's a new feature coming. But we'll go back here, back into the SDEF file. Note, I could have hit the refresh button, or I could have hit the back button and reopened the module. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to delete this as the government just to show you guys what it looks like. I can go in here and delete this item. Boom, back to that. And on the contractor side, I refresh, the SDEF file disappeared. So if the contractor accidentally imports the wrong SDEF file, or put their to-do list in instead of the actual SDEF file, they can't go in and delete it for now. They will in the future, but the government can go in, the import-export SDEF, select that SDEF file, and delete it. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have James take over. James is our expert with finances at the RMS Center. He's going to talk about some problems that may occur with the SDEF import. He's also going to go through an invoice to show what happens with an SDEF import, and he's going to talk about much more advanced issues with the SDEF file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop presenting. I'll give him the presenter role, and then what he's going to do is share his screen. He's got the same contract up with the same SDEF files. So give us a few minutes while we switch that over. All right, James, go ahead and present your screen.
Hi, my name is James McGuire, and I'll be going through some of the SDEF imports and progress payments, and eventually maybe getting into some change requests and mods. Feel free to put in questions that you have, and we'll try to answer those. So again, we have the government mode and contractor mode up. And say, for example, if you are in the contractor mode, in the SDEF schedule, and you want to import a different schedule, as Paul mentioned, you can select your new file. I'm going to go ahead and import this file because my file is just a little different than what Paul's was. I'm going to put in here impact schedule. Again, it doesn't matter what you choose, that's just for reference only. And then choose finish. Now again, the contractor cannot import that without requesting acceptance from the government. So I'll click that request acceptance. And over on the government mode, I will go ahead and put in, I'll accept this schedule. So approve the request to import. Now it should be ready to import. As has been mentioned before, when we see the little refresh button in the upper right-hand corner twirling, it means something has changed. So you can either click that or you can go back and then go back into the screen to make sure that it was refreshed. So I can see now that the schedule approval status in the upper right-hand corner is accepted for import. And again, you could look at the various things that may have changed with this SDEF import. So I'm going to preview the data into the contract and then import the data into the contract. So Dallas wants to spend a little time talking about the SDEF file and the pay request. So Dallas, anytime you want, feel free to interrupt and take over.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, last time I was getting some crazy feedback. So, all right, so just so that we're keeping everybody in the loop of the reason I like to always think about it is why do we care about an SDEF file in the first place? If we scroll on either the government or the contractor mode, since we already have a schedule, which we can say SDEF file or just schedule now, has been imported into RMS, we have early start dates, early finish dates, actual dates, how much these items cost, and if you see in the far left column, we have activity ID. Now, each of these activities IDs are unique features of work that we're going to be, I'm getting curious saying I have no audio. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, so let me close this real fast. Okay, so we have all these different activity IDs, and each of these activity IDs are really a different activity that the contractor is going to be performing. So if you see some of them, for example, is the site survey. When are they planning on performing this activity? Well, they can technically, based on their schedule, they're saying the earliest they can start this site survey is 12/14/2019. This is an old, just an example project. So the dates are just kind of arbitrary because it's not really a real project, it's a training one. But just for your purposes of understanding, you know, they could technically start as early on that date. And then they can the earliest they could finish the site survey is this other date. Now that being said, some of the items have a amount completed, like say, if, for example, they're going to be installing walls on 10 floors of the building, a very broad activity. Well, they may be requesting in their future payments on that activity for wall installation, 10%. Okay, so they when you're in the field, you go and you look, did they complete about 10% satisfactory completed, and it passes all the inspections, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then you can justify that, okay, they're about 10% on the amount they're requesting on that specific activity. And so each of these activities can have, as you can see in the third column, a cost associated with them. And you can see the next column over how much you've already paid to that specific activity. So it's really important that this SDEF file or this schedule that's created from P6 really helps both the contractor track all the activities that they're going to be performing, but also helps the government track the progress of each of those activities and how much they're going to get paid for each of those activities based off of the progression of what they've done. It also helps us see the start and finish dates, when they're expecting to start, when they're expecting to finish, and those can be flags for us to say, hey, you're not starting when you said that you're going to start, or you finished not when you said you're going to finish, and we could just kind of get a feel for if they're ahead of schedule or if they're behind schedule, etc. Paul, can we go to, or James, whomever, I don't know who's running it, flip it over to where the contractor can, for example, a pay request, we can start, for example, showing how a pay request is created, and then we can see how those, or I guess really the pay activities would probably be best because we're kind of talking about that. And we can show all these different pay activities are the same ones from that SDEF file. Do you want to talk a little bit about this specific window for the contractor side? And then we can then show how it connects to the SDEF file, and then show how that actually connects to the features of work and to the pay request creation itself.
Sounds good. So the SDEF schedule will import all of these activities, as Dallas mentioned, along with the amounts for each of the activities, including the cost and the cost to date, which this first activity, an approval of a bond, that is the only one, I believe, in this first pay request. You can actually sort on most of these screens by clicking the title of the screen. So if I click amount, it'll sort it in ascending order, click it again, and it'll be descending, so it will show you all the activities that have any amounts on them. You can sort by activity ID or description or by the CLIN. You can also view it based upon the CLIN. Double-clicking the CLIN, you can see all the activities that are assigned to that CLIN. You can also see what activities are assigned to contractors or to features of work. We imported this into the contract, but now I'm going to import this again because the schedule has changed into the payment. So I'm going to preview the import earnings into the payment. This will import the actual activity amounts into this invoice that I am currently going to send to the government. So I will preview it. Again, I can sort based upon these activity earnings, and it looks like there are two different activities that have amounts on them. Down in the lower right, I can import the invoice into, import the SDEF into the invoice. Now that that is done, I will go over to that progress payment.
Can I ask a short question? This is Tanya.
Sure.
So like, I don't know about other folks, but I know I've been having the issue when, say, the contractor sends a refund check, their activity earnings is totally out of, I'm going to say, jacked up. And so it kind of gives me error message after error message that our activities are not lined up anymore. Is this a way for us to realign the activity earnings, or is this something that the RMS team needs to do, or on the contractor side, or even if there is a CLIN realignment from Millington and they create, I'm calling them kind of like fake invoices to process theirs? I just noticed that's where I have a lot of issues with RMS.
Right. So there are several things that the contractor needs to do, and then the government, they need to do. The contractor cannot change any CLIN amounts. Those are set by the government. All the contractor can do is to set the amounts of the activities and which CLINs those activities are assigned to. So yes, the answer to your question is the most convenient way of doing this is for you to modify everything in P6, Primavera, or whatever scheduling software you're using, and then import it into RMS. If you don't do it from the scheduling software, but you rather do it by going into the activities themselves and changing things to get it to balance, the next time you import the schedule, it will overwrite everything that you've done. It may work for the current payment, fine, but the next time you try to do a payment, it will overwrite it. So we encourage you to go back to the scheduler and have them correct the schedule for those imbalances that you have, whether it is an amount on an activity, whether it's a refund, whether it is assigned to the wrong CLIN or not. Everything must balance. If the activities are not balancing with the CLINs after the SDEF import, you need to go back to the scheduler and say, we've got the activities that are imbalanced with the CLIN. We need you to make sure and check this out. Now, sometimes a scheduler will switch activities midstream. You've been paying on these activities all along, and then at some point the scheduler says, I want to renumber all of these activities to something entirely different. So then on the next pay request, you'll either have to negate the activities that were paid on previously and put the previous amounts on those new activities, or you could go back to the scheduler and tell them, please go back to using the old original activities that we've been using all along, which is usually the preferred way of doing it. However, sometimes a new scheduler is hired and they do things differently. So RMS has the capability of doing either one of those. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, kind of. So I can go in and adjust it themselves, so I don't have to go have the RMS team assist me in it. I should be able to. I'm a project managed specialist / scheduler, whatever you want to call them. So I can go ahead and adjust the activities on it, right? Is what you're saying.
Correct. You can do that. We encourage you to go back to the scheduler and have them correct it until things import and are balanced.
Okay.
Even though you could manually do it within RMS, then the next time you import their schedule, you'll have to do that all over again.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And when he's talking about the scheduler, he's talking about the contractor scheduler, not a government one.
Correct.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks.
So once everything is balanced, you have no variance in the activities, RMS will let you into the progress payment. RMS will not allow you to prepare a pay request if you have an imbalance. Once it is balanced, then you can pay on this. So we set the pay period through date. And again, these are arbitrary dates. You can see the summary based upon the CLIN. There's only one CLIN in this.
Now, are all these activities that they're requesting directly pulled from the SDEF, or are they able to adjust them in RMS?
You can adjust them in RMS, but if you do, the next time the SDEF is imported, it'll overwrite what your adjustments were. So you could adjust them in RMS, get the payment out, but then the next time you import it, it will reverse those. So We've got the subcontractor earnings. You could put amounts in there for whatever earnings, say, for example, $5,000 for this contractor. And you could withhold some, a deducted amount, if you wish, right there. Then on this additional earnings tab, that will show up on the subcontractor deductions. Up above, you also have the additional stored material, prepared work, and performance payment bond. You will only see these amounts if the contract setup is set to show those. So on the government side, I'll show you this real quick. Go back to the contract setup on the administration tab. The payment modifications tab. And there's this checkbox in the middle of the screen. Progress payments allow additional earnings not included in activity earnings. So if you don't want those to show up, you can actually uncheck that. And then when I exit out of this progress payment and I get a refresh from the database, and then I go back in, those are grayed out and missing. When the contractor is
Sir?
done with the payment.
I'm usually want to ask a lot of questions, even in our thing. So if you see that copy previous activity earnings, that little tab on the top right there, would that balance all the activity earnings too? Sorry, I'm just have to know all this stuff.
That's all right. So what that will do is to copy the previous invoices activity amounts. Sometimes the activity amounts will be zero for all the activities, maybe the SDEF imported, and those activities were all zeroed out. And maybe you just want to get this invoice out. So the contractor can copy the previous activity earnings, and it will bring those into the previous amounts.
So that would answer that question that I had earlier with if my activities are out of balance because of an action that Millington did, can I push this button and it would automatically pull in all the data from the previous invoice?
What we're looking at right now is this is the contractor side, so I don't know if it's reflected on the government side yet, but
okay, I'm sorry, I logged in a little bit later then.
No, that's fine. No, we're just moving forward through it, but maybe he can also address that if Millington's information isn't pulling or pushing to the right way.
Correct.
Okay,
so Millington doesn't care about activities. So activities don't go up to CFMS, and neither do we get anything down from CFMS with activities. Actually, all CFMS cares about are the obligation line items at the lowest level. Our contract line items, which they're also called contract line items for obligations in CFMS, our CLIMs will try to mimic the obligations, but can break down obligations into a deeper level. CFMS does not care about our contract line items either. All they care about are the obligations as you upload the payments into CFMS. So when you're talking about balancing all of these activities, it doesn't matter to Millington. They only care about the obligation level.
Right, as long as the CLIN and obligations, those numbers match, and you're not charging to a different CLIN and trying to balance it from, a different CLIN or obligation.
Right. So I'm going to complete this pay request. Again, it gives me a warning that this is going to be permanent. Click commits the changes to the database. Then I go back. On the government side, I can go into that progress payment.
And when you're in there,
Will now show.
Tim had a question with regards to when we're viewing it. So you did put I think $100 deduction on the subcontractor. Can you show where that is in the pay request, and then if it is on the government side, and then see his question there and address that question?
Okay, very good. Unfortunately, we have not allowed the government to modify the subcontractor amounts. But I will go ahead and open up this payment. The government will only be able to open up payments read-only until the contractor is finished with them. But once the contractor is finished and submitted it, then the government will be able to enter into the payment. There's a lot of detail. I'm not sure we want to go into all of the detail for these payments. But one of the things that people are not aware of is that there is the Return for Corrections button on the middle of the screen to the right. Return for Corrections. That allows you to send this payment back to the contractor. A lot of times we see some government people say that this pay request is all wrong, and so they delete the payment. There's no need to delete it. You can actually return it for corrections. Then the contractor doesn't have to do all the work that they did previously. They can just modify what was already there. One of the things also that is a gotcha is this payee office down below. Millington will not pay, and neither can you upload payments to CFMS without this payee office. People ask, where is this payee office set? When I click on it, you can select it, and sometimes there are no addresses there. This address comes down from CFMS, and it's in the vendor area of CFMS. The vendor needs to be active. Sometimes a vendor is marked inactive, and then there will be no addresses that will download. So CFMS needs to have a payee office for that vendor, and it needs to be active. And once you download from CFMS, that payee office should be filled. It needs to be selected the first time.
Can you talk about the payment invoice date as well, and that starting the clock of, because we only have a certain amount of days before, once they send it to us officially, that payment invoice date is the date that is going to be the time for the start of the clock. So if we sent it back for corrections 100 times, we're going to have to, as the government, change that payment invoice date to the actual date they actually have all their information and the pay request is correct and ready for payment. So at that date when they sent everything in, we adjust that date to match the date in which their contractor is actually ready for payment. And I always put in the ENG 93 remarks and saying, I always put comments in there saying, I return to corrections to the contractor on this date for this reason. And then the next time I'll say, I received all documentation on this date, therefore the payment invoice date has been updated to match. And so that way it's kind of covering me at the same time as it's easy for the contractor and everybody to follow along with what has been happening in the history. And so that payment invoice date on the top left, 3 things down, that one is the one that's sensitive to the time for us to get those payments out.
Very good. So the payment terms, as Dallas was mentioning, is right here. You can change the payment terms in the contract setup for what is the default. It must match whatever is agreed upon with that contract.
Can you describe the difference between payment invoice date and the and the invoice receive date?
Yes. So the payment invoice date is the date that the contractor actually puts on the invoice. The invoice received, you set that to the date that you actually receive the invoice. Then there's a pay period from date, which needs to be set. That is the beginning of that pay request time period, and then a through date. So those will need to be set, or else on the final obligations tab, it will complain saying that you need to fill those dates in. Well, sometimes you can also have a discount. Go ahead.
And Daniel, I can't say his last name, had a question with regards to, is it the, I believe that it was the payment invoice date over the invoice receipt date of the one that pushes that date, that clock for us to have payment made by CFMs or Millington. Is that true?
Yes, I think it is the receive date. I would have to check absolutely in the code, but I'm pretty sure that the invoice receive date is when the clock actually starts.
Okay, then I might have misspoken, but either way, the same logic applies to it, is that we're going to need to adjust those dates based off of us sending it back and thus finally getting all the actual information from the contractor, that is all the supporting information for this payment.
So discount days, sometimes a contractor will give the government discounts for paying early. And you can put those days in there and the discount that they will give. There's a mark for the final payment. When the final payment occurs, there are special rules that Millington is placing on that payment. It has to be signed before it is uploaded. On the regular invoices before final payment, the actual ENG 93 is uploaded, but not the signed copy. You can give them the signed copy, but you'd have to send it to them manually. The final payment goes through a special prompting of the user to actually sign that ENG 93, and it will upload that with the payment. There's also an increase in payment terms to 30 days for the final payments. Sometimes what people have done is to go ahead and make the final payment as a regular payment, and then I've seen where they will actually add a final payment for $0.00. That way they get the contractor paid earlier. I know there was a question earlier about being able to change the subcontractor earnings and deductions. Unfortunately, again, that's read-only. So if you need to change that, you don't like what you see here, then go back to that first tab, return the payment for corrections. I would say no, but that will return it back to the contractor. Contractor can make the changes and then submit it to the government again. And once the government receives it, then they can proceed. The requested activity earnings gives you a view of what the contractor actually submitted. This is a read-only screen. The allowed activity earnings is where you will make any changes on the government side to what you see. If you don't like what you see, you want to change some of these amounts, they can actually be changed here. You can edit either by percentage, or if it's a unit type, by quantity, or the allowed amount.
And that's we would change those. The reason why we want to change those is, say we're negotiating with the not really negotiating, but you kind of do this. You have a conversation with the contractor. Every time you're about to do a pay request, you walk the site, or you've looked at the site, or whatever your deliverables are, you've reviewed them. And based off of that, you go, you're asking for 100%, but we don't have any test results, or we don't have, if you're actually not done, you forgot about this big old section over here. You can reduce that by a percentage or by an amount, and that then quantity that would actually be billed can be changed in that location there.
Sounds good. So the final steps, you can look at the CLIN level. If you have a lot of CLINs, you may want to see what was charged against each CLIN. Then we have the additional earnings tab. Again, the additional earnings, preparatory work and things will only be available with that contract setup selected. Additional stored materials, the contractor can enter those, and then you can modify those here. On the lower left of the screen is something that was added like a year or so ago. It allows you to select how the obligations are calculated. So on the Obligations tab, which we'll go to in just a moment, RMS will try to estimate the best it can through complicated calculations which obligations should be charged and what value. Those can be manually changed under any plan. The standard calculation allows RMS to do the calculations and try to adjust for previous payments. What we find happening a lot of times is that people will start adjusting what obligations are billed against. Once you start adjusting those yourself manually, then on subsequent invoices, RMS will go in and try to rebalance them to what they should be to date. That can make for some discrepancies on what you may want for the current invoice. So we've allowed users to select periodic calculation. What that will do is to only bill the obligations that are assigned to the CLINs on this particular pay request and not try to adjust it for previous pay requests. You still have to stay within the obligation amounts that are available. So if you are having problems where it is assigning amounts in that obligation tab for the obligations and they're all messed up and it's trying to adjust for previous payments and you just want it to reflect whatever CLINs are assigned for this current payment, choose the periodic calculation and then it will assign only to the CLIN to those obligation line items that are in this pay request. The final step then on this tab is to check the checkbox total allowed earnings for this pay period. That will complete the adjustments for the amounts for this pay request. There's a question, will this work with contracts that started in 238 and transferred to 30? Actually, RMS 238 didn't perform quite as many calculations. 30 does a little more. Past invoices will stay the way they were, but 30 will try to adjust in the future for those obligation line item amounts based upon its algorithms, which are slightly different than 238. And again, RMS is trying to make the estimate of what should be billed on what obligations. There's another thing that really enters in here. I'll just take a moment since this is in the topic. I'm going to go back to the contract setup, administration, contract setup, and there's a funding method at the bottom of the screen. There are 3 different options. You can choose pre-planned, which is the normal contract. That will actually adjust the obligation amounts for the CLINs on that obligation tab according to pre-planned amounts. If you don't know what amounts are going to be for what obligations, then you would choose the second option. So we're looking at the project level, computing obligation amounts based upon available funds. And it will roll over to other obligation line item amounts as needed in order to make the payment. Again, you can manually adjust those anytime. Then there's a final one where you just manually enter obligation amounts. And RMS does not try to estimate it all.
And then if they were to manually input them, is it the contractor that manually puts them, and is it the government, or both? And then also the question, can we change the funding method at any time or only during contract creation?
Okay, good question. So the contractor can't do anything with the CLINs. All they can do is assign activities to the CLINs. So what CLINs are assigned to what obligations and what is billed against the obligation, that is all in the realm of the government. So it has nothing to do with the contractor, really. It just is pointing to where the money is coming from, not how much money is given on what activities. So the CLINs cannot be changed. Only the activity amounts that are assigned to the CLINs can be changed by the contractor. So they do have a part in the sense that what activities they bill against may end up going towards those obligations, but they don't control these things at all. Now, can these be changed midstream? Yes. But if you do try to change it, it's going to ask you to confirm that, because it will actually remove all the previous calculations for those obligations. So we encourage people not to do that.
But does it only change it for the current pay request, or for all future or past?
For all future. So it will not change the past pay requests, but any calculations for the obligations in the future will be changed.
Okay, let's go to back to the pay request and how we actually process that pay request, and then also after we process this, let's go to how the activity, like if we had like a deficiency on an activity, how do we know that, and how do we see that for when we're doing a review of a schedule? Oh, sorry, a review of a pay request.
Okay. So the final step is to make sure in balance with the obligations. This is a simple contract, has one main obligation line item. Then there was a mod added to this contract later, so there is another obligation line item, but it is not billed against currently. So we have the full amount against that first obligation line item. The bottom line is, at the very bottom of the screen, you can't have a variance. There will be errors on the lower right-hand corner in the big gray box if there is an imbalance. Say, for example, I set this off, then there will be an error that says obligations this period must equal earnings this period. So I need to go in and balance the obligation line item. Then and only then can I check the E&G 93 complete. We actually plan to go ahead and import another SDEF, and we can show some activity imbalances. And one of the common things that happens when somebody changes the activities in the SDEF schedule. Okay, so we'll go ahead and complete this E&G 93. Once the E&G 93 is complete, it will allow the contractor to prepare the next pay request. We don't have
Now
the
we have to-
capability of sending. Go ahead.
Yep, we have to sign this document and everything still, though, correct? And I know I'm kind of leading the question is how do we, how many times we have to sign and why the different signatures and where we sign those things to actually say it's official.
Right. That's more of an office procedural question, Dallas, and you could probably answer that a lot better than I could. The invoice is automatically put in the document package once you mark that ENG 93 complete. Then you can go into the invoice, the actual ENG 93, I'm sorry, and you could actually sign this document.
So you have to click on that document package, the ENG 93, and that's the one that has to have our signatures on it. And right now it shows that it's not signed by us.
Right. So it's not signed. So then you go up to the upper right-hand corner, select
and we
sign, select document. Yep. And then you check the checkbox. And if you have a CAT card, it will actually prompt you for your PIN.
And at this point, it's saying signed as the preparer. So that could be our contract specialist, or it could be the COR, or whomever's actually doing that preparation of that and reviewing it. But the final signature so after we sign, we'll end up signing it twice because we have to have both the person that's the COR or the person with contractual authority actually issue that payment. So hit finish. Sorry, and John Stevens correct, the project engineer. Usually is that same person with the contractual authority. So then we would end up having to sign it again, but we would select to be as the general signature location. Can you that ENG 93
right.
prepare?
Yeah, I don't have the CAT card signature capability here.
Okay, so then we'll just talk it through a little bit. But anyways, whoever has the authority to actually sign for the pay request, we're going to have to sign it twice because it requests one for the preparer and one for the person with contractual authority. And so we sign it twice in that location. We click on that document, open it up, hit sign, put in our PIN number, then it'll switch over to the other signature location, and we click on the document, hit sign, and put in our PIN number again. And then we can also check in the bottom if it's been manually signed by us or not. But yeah, anyway, that's we have to make sure that we sign it twice before we actually send it to CFUNS, because otherwise we won't have the signatures on there that we need to have. Go ahead, sorry.
No problem. Thank you. So completing the package, once you complete it, then the document will be sent to PCF. The document packages need to be completed before they will actually be sent to PCF. And you can actually go back to the contract file and we can see the payments that were made. We've been playing around with this for a while, so we'll see a couple of them in there. We've already gone through some other pay requests as well. So notice this one says ready to send to PCF. It's the only one because it's the only one that we completed. So again, it needs to be completed. The status of when it's sent to PCF will be at the bottom of the screen. It says right now at the very bottom of the screen, the status is ready to send to PCF. So this will be picked up most likely on the next pass through for that district. We rotate through all the districts and send 100 documents every time until we get through all the districts and then start over again. Once this gets sent to PCF, there will be a status that will come back and it will say that it has been received or accepted by PCF. So this payment has actually been approved. Now, we want to jump in a little bit. Is this okay, a good time for us to get into change requests and modifications?
I think we should go back to, again, now the next SDEF first, and then we can ask some questions to see if we had any questions specifically on some of these. And I'm going to read some of their questions real quick, and as well while you're going to go back and say the contractor goes to their next month and they have a new update. What do they see and what do they do, and then what do we see?
Okay, that sounds good. RMS is very flexible in the sense that we have a modification for this next payment that we need to do. But I'm going to, as a contractor, assume that that modification is in place, even though it is not. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go ahead and add this next SDEF file that I have for this contract. It's from May 20th. And I'll go ahead and choose this as a monthly update and finish. Then I'm going to request acceptance to import. On the government side, I'm going to approve that to be imported. Then it will preview the data, import into the contract. I do notice there's an activity that will be deleted. And I see that activity ID in the upper left-hand corner, 0001. So we were using a different type of activity numbering. And then the name of this second activity is the same name as the first. So what has occurred here is that they used for a while the first activity and we paid on it. Then the second activity is coming in and it is replacing that previous activity that has been paid on. So we're going to see what actually happened. Also, in the lower right of the screen, you'll notice that the activity amount is in red, 976,000. And the current contract amount is only 948. I'm expecting the mod, but evidently the contract doesn't show it yet, so the government hasn't actually completed it. But I'm going to go ahead and import this anyway into RMS. So this SDEF has been imported. I'm going to look at the activities, and I can see there's some variances here. 27,000, that's the amount of the mod that I'm expecting. So the mod is not there. And I can't assign it to anything because there isn't enough money there. I mean, I can I've got the activities I tried to import, but the activities, they don't have enough money. So the CLIN amount does not balance with the activity amount. The contractor can't change those CLIN amounts. So the contractor is going to be stuck at this point. The contractor is going to call up the government and tell them, hey, I can't assign these activities to the CLIN. It's showing imbalanced. And when I go in to the pay request and I try to prepare the next pay request, it's not letting me. It says the sum of activities is not equal to the current contract amount. Help. So what the government needs to do, the government needs to go in and create this mod. First thing the government needs to do is to add the change request.
So, when we have these modifications, of course, they all have to be negotiated and signed by the people with the contractual authority to actually sign modifications and stuff like this. And so that money isn't necessarily what the contractor is putting on there, is not necessarily what's negotiated. So only what's negotiated and approved should be what we're putting into RMS on the government side. We don't want to be doing something that we shouldn't be doing, I guess you could say, and accepting money from that the contractor is recommending for us to input. But anyway, so we would at this point, we're going to be saying we're going to start doing like a basic change document, which is a basis for creating a modification. We'll probably go through this a little fast since I know we only have about 30 minutes left, and I see that we still have some other questions. But we'll go through this basic step just relatively quickly so we can show that those activities are balancing from both the sides. But yeah, and then that way we can talk from there on with answering their questions.
Very good. I'll rush through this then. So I'll do this as fast as possible. So a reason code, we'll go ahead and add. There's user changes. And again, there can be questions later, but we'll just go ahead and run through this. This will create a change request. Some things that are necessary. We need an inception date. I am going to put any date in here. It really doesn't matter at this point because we're just going to run through this real quickly. I don't have to try to select that. We add the BCD item. This allows us to put in all these descriptions for these amounts and to put in the initial estimate. Say that the original estimate was $30,000. Maybe a new power source. Then we go to the status funding tab. Here is where Dallas was talking about. There's a lot of checks and balances here. So we got the BCD, approval plan, specs, government estimate required. Any of these check boxes that are checked need to have a date in them. I'm going to put some dates in here again. I'm just going to accept today's date because it's easy and quick to add. And I'm going to put in 30,000 here as an estimate. But I'm going to negotiate this. And so we're actually negotiating this down to the point where we got the mod, which is $27,947. Then I need to assign it to funding. The actual money doesn't need to be totally available yet, so you can actually bill against it. The variance needs to be 0 at the bottom. That completes the change request and should make it available for a mod that I create. So I'll go ahead and create the mod. If I'm going too fast, Dallas, let me know.
Yeah, at this
just
point,
an overview.
I'll add in a little bit of verbiage. So the basic change document is like what we're going to be using. We use that and we link. It's not necessarily right here is where we're creating the SF data, and most people are familiar with that already from the modifications. But this is when we would say we're going to link to this modification could link to that, link back to that BCD that we created with all the reason codes, all the reasons why we are creating this modification, and then you can go ahead and put some of that in this. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So we can add the change request here. Okay. So basic change document evidently is still uncompleted. Let me go back to the change request. There's something I left undone. Oh, I need the BCD date. So again, these dates are very particular. The change request is now added. On the second grid down in the middle of the screen, I can add a CLIN. There are 3 different options. I can automatically add a CLIN, or I could manually add a CLIN, or I can revise an existing. Revising an existing CLIN is the quickest and easiest, so I'll go ahead and revise the current CLIN, and I'll put the total amount on that. The funding will appear down below in just a moment. The SF30, I put in the mod number. And again, there's a lot of places where you can fill in.
That's why I try not to talk about it too much. Because we're playing into it. The more we talk about it, there's 2 things he wants us to talk about.
These will all fill in as well for reasons, closing statements.
Yeah, and all those items that you're filling would be filling in there are stuff that is like the background information on your supporting information for this modification and various notes that you need to put in.
There's a lot to talk about in terms of the specifics that Russia is doing and not.
Is somebody not on mute?
But people think maybe legit, but I don't want to have happen. I don't want people reaching the point where you can understand sometimes.
If you're on the telephone, you can do a *6 and that will mute you, and you can do a *6 again to unmute. We're definitely hearing a conversation in the background.
Figure out iwillvote.com. Figure out.
Okay, so I am going to fund this modification. The data was sent to the contractor, signed by the contractor. The government signature date is a key. Once you put in the government signature date, all the previous screens will be read-only and you can't modify them. The way you can modify a mod is to go back to that government signature date and remove it. And then that will make these previous tabs editable. Then we can fund this by double-clicking on this line and fund it. Notice that the change request funding is brought in, so I can put in that amount. The variance down below is 0. Click next and finish.
And on that tab, you may have multiple funding accounts that you're going to be funding this mod with, so you could add different obligation line items, etc., and pull in. That's why they give you it pops down with different options and different amounts. And so until it's actually the variance shows 0, it's not going to really, it's not going to make the modification go through. So it's just, we're going a little bit quick through this so we can get to some of your questions.
Okay, then you hit the back button. Modification funded checkbox at the bottom of the screen. And then finally, I check the modification completed. Only when I check that final modification completed checkbox is the amount included in the current contract. So if I go back to my finances, finances and the current CLIN, the best area to see that initially, because I have the CLIN 1. Notice this is the award amount for that CLIN, and then here is the mod. That second line will only appear when that modification checkbox, that final one, is checked to complete that mod. If I went back and unchecked it, this line would disappear. So now I have the full amount that that contractor expected And I can go back to the contractor mode. Make sure my screen is refreshed, so I exit the screen and go back into the pay activities, and the variance is now 0. So the contractor should be able, everything is balanced, should be able to submit their pay request. So then they can view their invoice, create the next invoice, and send it on to the government. Now here's one thing that I did want to point out. It's a very common issue. When a scheduler switches the activities that they are using from a previous pay request that was paid to new activities, and sometimes there's a host of activities, the contractor will look at this and they'll see these negatives all over the place. And it scares them. It's like, what is this? There's negatives all over. What that means is this activity 0001 was used on a previous payment or payments, and amounts were added to it, previous amounts, but now the activity is no longer in the SDEF file. So that activity is deleted from RMS. So all the previous amounts that were paid for that activity needs to be negated and put on another activity. Remember how we mentioned that we can sort by clicking on the column heading. So I'm going to click a couple times. You can see this is the only activity right now. So I need to put that activity amount on another activity. This is another activity with the same name. So that amount should go there. Now,
and that would be the contractor changing that?
Yeah, the contractor changes this, but what they really should be doing is to go back to their SDEF import. Their SDEF import should have brought that amount in with that activity to replace it. So they could go back to their scheduler and have them produce another SDEF, and that would have imported, or they can do it manually. So currently all I've got in this pay request is the previous amount on an activity that's put on a new activity. I also have $100, but I think that's the $100 that was held on that subcontractor. So I could put that back in there. I accidentally hit the back button there. But now the total earnings is 0. So if we imported a new SDEF schedule, it would bring new amounts in for a new pay request.
Perfect.
So Dallas, where would you like to go from here?
I wouldn't mind hearing if anybody has some questions to go ahead and type them in. But in the meantime, let's go over to the, since we've been talking a lot about pay activities themselves, let's go into saying like where we would know if there's actually a problem with the pay activity, say like the QA or even the QC put in a deficiency with one of those items. How would we know to, so for example, I would want to not withhold money, but I would say I'm not going to pay you the full amount. How would I know that there's a deficiency on that specific activity?
A deficiency in the sense of start
like a QA or QC deficiency or something to note, because those pay activities, those activities are actual items that are work going to be performed in the field or something along those lines. A lot of the times, I mean, some of them are bonds or So I'm kind of saying how do these activities go throughout RMS and the other modules is really what I'm trying to get to.
Okay. Paul, would you like to take over on that?
Sure, I can definitely do that. Is my mic unmuted? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. So, okay. All right. So we can go back to my screen. Give me a few minutes to present. Go, and we're going to share my screen. All right, it's connecting. All right, when you guys see my screen, let me know.
I see it.
All right, perfect. So the question was, if there's a problem, especially with the pay activities, how would the government know? Inside of the contract, when you open up the contract, there's the finances button right here. Once you click on the finances button, you can go to the pay activities. Just note, if there are any problems with the pay activities, it's not going to let the contractor do a progress payment at all. But a lot of times when the contractor does an SDEF import and it screws everything up, it will show here first, and everything's going to be in red. There's going to be a big variance. There's going to be a ton of activities with no CLIN assigned. So you click on this button right here, you'll see a whole bunch of activities not assigned to a CLIN. That's, in my experience, that's been where the pay activities have varied wildly from the contract. You know, the contractor accidentally imported an incorrect SDEF file, or they imported one that was earlier than what they thought. So at that point, if you're looking at this screen, and there's a large variance at the bottom, it's not going to let the contractor do a payment at all. The contractor is going to go in on their side, they're going to go and try to add an invoice, and it's going to say, sorry, you can't add an invoice because these activities don't match with the line items, or these activities are not assigned to a line item. And the government can go on this side. Right now, the screen that you're looking at, everything looks fine, right? We don't have a variance at the bottom. We don't have any activities that are unassigned. Everything is golden. So there shouldn't be a problem. However, if the contractor doesn't import an SDEF file that screws everything up, you're going to have red here at the bottom where it says variance. And at that point, usually what the government does is contact the contractor and tell them, hey, it looks like, you know, something happened that didn't, you know, it doesn't appear that that was what you wanted. So you tell the contractor, okay, go in and import the correct SDEF file. A lot of times this can be prevented by looking at the preview imported of the SDEF file as well. So say it's already in a messed up state, right? Contractor's saying they can't get their invoice out. Of course, it's on the last day. They want to get this out today. You tell them, all right, first thing we have to do is get an SDEF file into RMS that will fix everything. Now remember, when you import the SDEF file, whatever's in the SDEF file will overwrite what's inside of RMS. So if they imported a previous one that's incorrect with different activities from a different contract or one that was earlier, all they have to do is find the correct SDEF file, do that import, boom, everything should go back to normal. So, you know, you have them come back here, the contractor is going to go and import their SDEF file. You're going to have to approve it, right? Once they approve it, or once you approve it, they import it, everything should go back to normal and look something like this screen right here. So this screen that you're seeing in front of you with the government side where there's no variance, that's usually a very good sign. Usually this tab right here is a good indication of where things are hiding that are problem issues, where, you know, some activities were left behind, or they added some activities accidentally to Primavera that don't have a line item assigned. But during the preview import process on the contractor side, it should show them, as James was showing, when you go in. So for example, this one right here was not approved, right? This was a problem one, I believe. Let's go to preview import earnings. This is on the contractor side. So right here, this one was not found in the SDEF file. What's going to happen? Right here, this one was not found in the SDEF file. It's going to keep the earnings, but it gives you an idea of what's going to happen when you do the import. Let's see here what the import data looks like right here. So if they import the contract data, which is important if they have schedule updates, so almost always they're going to import that, right? For example, this one right here, this activity is going to get wiped out. So if I get this SDEF file and I approve it as the government and the contractor imports it, it's going to throw something off, right? So here we have red. Whenever there's red, that's usually a good indication that there's something wrong. If the contractor imports this, it will show a big variance over here and not let them do a payment. So it won't even allow them to do a payment. So if they try to import the payment, it'll say, there's a variance, the activities don't match, and whatnot. And it can be a variety of problems, right? We already covered that. The SDEF file from a different contract, the SDEF file they thought was the latest one, but it wasn't, et cetera, et cetera. All they have to do is go back through this whole process of importing the SDEF file, and everything should be fine. Did that answer that question?
I think it did for how to problem solve some of that. We did have another question. Can you flip over to where we can manually update for our? It's not anything necessarily what we're dealing with here specifically, but it is with regards to how the progress of the is reflected on a report, and I believe that's on the government side. Go to the main menu, admin, main tab, and then contract status report, and where these numbers we can manually update them, because right now we're in the process of updating how RMS processes progress. And so if you're getting problems currently with how the progress goes, you can manually update these percentages of the total contract percent complete here on this tab here, and you can go in and update them manually, and can you describe what the update scheduled progress button does?
Definitely, I can definitely talk about that. Let me first see if, James, are you available to talk about this? Because I think you know a lot more about this than I do.
Certainly.
All right, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so you can click the update scheduled progress. You can also update this based upon manual settings. You can use an S curve. You could use an activity schedule by the contractor, and you can do a mid-float, late activity schedule, or you can copy the actual projected placement into this area. So those are different options to update the schedule. If you don't like what you see, you can always manually update this at any time. Go ahead and click OK. So if you look on the right-hand side, you can enter in all of those manually, all the scheduled percent progress.
And we do that to show that, when we're trying to do our reports and we know better what actual percentage, maybe it's not what is showing to be reflected of what we know it to be, we can change that. So thank you for answering that question. Now, is there a way for, on the quality assurance section of RMS, if there's a deficiency, do those actually link to the activity ID or the activities specifically?
Let's see here. So the question was the deficiencies. Do those link to activities? So I'll create a daily report here. I may have to create one on the contractor side as well. Let's see here. So deficiencies, we'll go and add one. And link it to an activity. So this is site 1. This is a. We're going to link this to one of the activities, say cleanup, and shift 1. So yes, you can link that to an activity.
Okay, and then I guess the question then is, when it is linked, how do we see that? Is this the only location to see that it's linked to that activity? Or is there another way of being notified of that? I know it's kind of like a on-the-fly type of thing, so if we need to look it up, that's okay too.
Got it. Okay, so on the contractor side, I have the contractor side on the right-hand side. Notice, well, first let me back out of here, and then we'll go back into the deficiencies. Notice that when I start up the deficiencies on the contractor side, which is on the right-hand side, yellow at the top or gold, it defaults to the issued, not corrected tile right here. So this is a deficiency found that has not yet been corrected on the contractor side. They need to correct this, and then the government can concur or not concur. On the government side, when I open up the deficiencies, it defaults to the not verified, because that's where the government's going to spend most of their time, correct? They're going to verify whether or not the contractors actually fixed some of these deficiencies, whether it be QA or QC. So make sure you pay attention to the whiteout up here. It's going to let you know where you are. So if I want to see the ones that haven't been corrected, I can go over here and click on all, and I can concur that it's been fixed or reissue, but it hasn't been reported yet. So in this current state, we're waiting on the contractor to go and actually work on this, right? The contractor can also go in and add a deficiency on the QC side. For sake of time, I'll just put in some text there, and we'll say mobilization for the activity. We'll go back, and of course, the contractor says it's been corrected. Once it's been corrected, it'll move off. Note right up here on the top right-hand corner, we have corrected, not verified. It now has a 1 for QC. On the government side, we got the refresh button spinning. We'll hit refresh, and we have, may have to go out and back in. Give me a second.
And from there, can you show the pay request worksheet under contract reports for the other question after we're done with this?
Yes. So on the government side here, we have the QC. Notice I had to go off of the screen here in order for it to appear on that side. So sometimes hitting the refresh button doesn't quite do it. You got to hit the back button for it to save to the server, get over to the server, and then you see it on this side. So if you're sitting here waiting for something and you got 2 copies of RMS up, to hit back and then go back in. So on the government side, we have an issue not verified. How do we see that? If we open up the daily report, we've got 1 issued, 1 not verified today. So right here is the QA. The QC is not going to show up on the initial report until we go and verify it. So unfortunately, you have to open up the daily reports. We're going to go all the way back out. The QC report's not completed. Usually, you're not going to go in here until the contractor has completed their report. You open this up, and on the left-hand side, the deficiency, 0 of 1 verified today. So we're going to go in here and say, all right, I think the contractor's done a good job on this. We can click on that, see their comments down here. We'll concur, and that'll pop it over to the verified side. When I go back, now it says 1 of 1 verified today. So if that number matches both sides, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about any more work on that side. And on the contractor side, go ahead.
So the whole purpose of why we're going through this is so that these items that are deficiencies are actually linked to those same pay request items from that SDEF file. So it's really showing that, RMS not controls, but it links all, it really shows the importance of a proper schedule and a proper SDEF file, and makes your life and the contractor's life really easy to be able to validate these things, is because you can go in when you're reviewing it, pay requests, you can go in and see what deficiencies are still outstanding, and you can see what activity that they're linked to, and same with the contractor. And so it gives you some negotiating, not really negotiating, but it gives you some leeway to say, well, I can't really pay you for that even though you want me to, because you haven't really fixed this yet. And you say, see this deficiency on this activity, it just shows that from all the way from the beginning of our presentation, we were giving up how to upload an SDEF or a schedule into RMS, how we process a pay request, but then we're also seeing how these are linked into the other features of RMS. And so, for example, like the QA or the QCs, they're putting in these items. So when we can go in and are going to be paying the contractor, we can go back and validate that, yes, these items have been closed out, or no, they haven't been closed out, and adjust the payments as necessary from there. Let me go and see if there's some other questions real quick. I was talking and not reading.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Wes Sappert. So when that question was first introduced, we were more on the pay application side in the finances portion. And the way it was phrased, I was expecting that there was a way, let's say, for instance, the contractor billed 100% against an activity, that there was an easy way to see what deficiencies were tied to an activity. So what you just described is typically done, at least in our office, on the field side, and our office engineers handle the payment side. So there's a lot of manual effort going back, searching through those to find what outstanding deficiencies there are and what pay activities they're associated with. From the discussion, the way the question was phrased initially, I was expecting that from the finance portion, you would be able to see more easily any deficiencies that were outstanding against that activity. So I assume after going through all that, that is not the case.
Well, and I mean, we can check if that's the case, because I'm not familiar with all aspects of RMS, but I am part of the steering committee, and so we can always put in a request to make something a little bit more direct. But as he's pulling up here, this is what is going to be getting sent to us, the contractor pay request worksheet, and it shows the percentages for each thing. Can you describe what's reflected on this form, James or Paul?
Yes. All right, give me a second. I want to try invoice number 1, see if that shows the deficiencies. No, it does not. All right. I may have to complete out the contractor side.
I don't see a report that actually lists the deficiencies based upon activities.
No.
Yeah, so I think this is great, because I think if it's not showing, then I think this would be a good way to kind of close in all the loops of activities and deficiencies and pay requests, and to make it more coherent. So if we don't get it in there, I'll be definitely putting in a steering committee request to maybe make it a little bit more flowing or stream. Well, all jumbled up with my words. But either way, in the meantime, we still have the ability to open up those deficiencies and validate that the various deficiencies have been closed out. And we can see where those activities are, if they've been closed out or if they're still outstanding, and what activity has those deficiencies. And so that could be a good check in the meantime.
Sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Agreed. It is a good check. It's just that it's a lot of manual effort involved, and that if it were generated through the system, it would just make life a little easier.
Yeah, I concur with that. We're trying to make things, we've been doing a lot of different updates to RMS to make things a little bit more easier instead of the manual. So I think that may be a good future update. So I appreciate that and bringing that to our attention as well. So we're right about the 2-hour mark. Did you guys have, Paul, James, have any other comments, or Carrie and or Anita, anybody have any other comments that they want to add in? Please know, I'm going to add one little caveat here. Feel free to email me, dallas.d.carlisle@usace.army.mil. I'll put it in the chat. If you have any questions or update requests that you think may be good for improving RMS. But then also know that we have a YouTube channel for RMS and how to process things in RMS, and we break it down, and we're constantly adding to that YouTube channel of different processes. And so if you go to YouTube and look up RMS Support Center, you'll find all of our different videos. So we also have it on
whatever you want,
both.
Man. That's what you're good at.
We have it on YouTube and then also on the RMS website. So as you can see here, we have somebody's not on mute, but that's all right. We got all of these different videos. So if you have questions maybe try this section first, and also if you have other questions, of course, there's also the help desk and such. So I'll be putting in my email address here in the chat, and I'll leave it open to anybody if they wanted to have any closing remarks.
Dallas, you want to mention the updated manuals?
Oh, good. We're also in the process of also not just the YouTube channel, we're also getting contractor mode and government mode manuals created and updated, so that way it's more user-friendly for both the contractor and the government. And so we should be having those out here shortly as well. Of course, there has been ones in the past already created, but we're making it more cohesive and complete, and so those are going to be coming out here as well. Give me 1 second. I'm going to read on the side real fast. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, this is Carrie.
Yes. I hear you.
Okay, so I just wanted to say the new contractor manual is on the RMS website if anybody needs that. I just wanted to say I know we have received a lot of feedback and a lot of questions and a lot of, I'll say, complaints, for the lack of a better term, on the placement issue. I just wanted to say we are working on that, as well as PII, of course, is an issue right now. Some guidance will be coming out on that pretty soon. So I just wanted to mention those because I know I've received a lot of emails about it anyways. And so, but yeah, again, so the contractor manual is on the website, and the government manual is currently in review. So it should be posted here within the next few weeks. Over.
Thank you, Carrie. So with that being said, know that we have a YouTube channel, and you can go to the RMS. You can just go straight up to RMS website and pull up the videos from there, or to YouTube itself and type in RMS Support Center, and you'll be able to see the channel there. And you can pull up those videos. There's contractor mode, which help, and government mode. So, and we'll continue to add content to those sets of videos. If that's all, thank you for joining. Hopefully we answered some of your questions, and we look forward to hearing from you if you have any others. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.